Or going live.
It really is.
Or going live.
It really is. All right, welcome everyone. This is the latest in our series of AMAs. This particular series is Meet the Developer, and the objective is we wanted to give Chingus, who are starting your career or looking to change positions, to change jobs, the opportunity to meet people who have been through that process so that you can hear what they have to say, you can learn from their experiences, and help you to achieve success in your career. Before we get started, I want to make sure everyone can hear. If you could respond in the chat. As we go through this afternoon, just post any questions in the chat. We will leave time at the end to make sure that we address all of your questions. And so we're going to just wait just a second and let folks catch up here. There we go. There's Ed. All righty. Then let's dive right in. So again, with us today, we have the Sabby, who is part of the Chingu X team, but he is also, I guess, within the past 2 years, transitioned into the workforce, and he has a real job besides the Chingus. So Sabby, I'm going to turn it over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
All right. Hey, everyone. It's Sabby over here. Real name Musaab Elfaqih. I'm from Sudan originally. I'm currently living in the Netherlands. And just a small correction there. I actually have been working for almost 4.5 years now.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So cool. So, how did you get interested in web development? What was the spark or the prompt?
It was actually kind of random. It was a chance, basically. So it was when I was maybe 13. I was bored one summer and I wanted to kind of learn something new, and I was interested in tech. That's all I knew at that point. And programming seemed like the most accessible thing for a 13-year-old at that time. And so I just started kind of searching. It was very generic keywords, like I had to learn to program and everything. And eventually I found out that the easiest in, or the quickest return for, and that's what I was looking for when I was 13, is web development. And a little bit more Googling, and I ended up on W3 Schools, was the website at the time. I think it's still around.
It's still there, yeah.
And the tutorials were easy enough for me to follow. I actually ended up spending many weeks of my summer vacation just on W3 Schools learning CSS and HTML and whatever I could from JavaScript and PHP. It was hard at the time to get into those, but I managed to kind of do enough to spark an interest, and I just kind of never stopped since then.
Sure. Were you into gaming? Did that have any influence, or did that spark your interest in development at all?
I would say maybe as much as any 13-year-old, but I was very interested in tech. I knew even then that is the industry I'm going to be in for sure. Sure. That was my whole life.
Gotcha. Did you attend a university?
I did briefly. Well, not briefly. So I spent 3.5 years in Jordan in university studying. Well, I started off as an electronic engineering student, and then I transitioned to computer engineering, and then I just dropped out.
Gotcha. And did you ever shock yourself as a double E student?
A double E?
Electrical engineering, did you say?
Shock myself? How so?
Yeah. Oh, in building electronics or?
Yeah, I've burnt myself a few times soldering materials together. I also inhaled a lot of the fumes. You're not supposed to do that, apparently. Yeah, it's maybe that's why I dropped out.
Gotcha.
It wasn't my skill set.
So in my younger days, I actually had a ponytail, and I learned the hard way that don't let long hair hit a capacitor. It's,
Oh, yeah. At the
it
time,
can
my
be
hair was
bad.
short, so that that was good.
Gotcha. So have you found that not having a formal university degree? I mean, you had the 3.5 years, but has that had any or held you back in any way? Have you noticed any problems with not having that?
So it's definitely a different path. So there are some, I wouldn't say problems, it's just some challenges that are really only at the beginning. As far as I can tell, I'm not really that far into my career, obviously, but the problems were mainly around, okay, what's next? If I don't have a degree, what am I supposed to do next? Should I just do what people do after they get their degree, like try to follow the same route? Should I just piece together a resume, or should I try to stand out some other way? And a lot of the time, it did feel kind of bad. Early days, especially, and I was working before I dropped out. And so I kind of already had the feeling of being the person in the room that did not get a formal education to do what I was doing. So it would sort of, you would notice it at times when someone would mention something, and then everyone in the room would know what they're talking about in terms of like maybe like a concept or an algorithm or something that everyone would have just learned as part of the curriculum in school. But those situations were rare enough that it didn't really matter. It just felt weird. And usually all of that stuff you can just kind of pick up yourself. It's all online. It's just you didn't have the guidebook, so to
Right,
speak.
right.
It has its upsides, though, of course.
Sure. Have you noticed that there were any doors closed in terms of positions you've applied for, because of that lack of a degree, or has your experience been able to offset that?
Generally, I haven't had the experience or a door was closed because of the lack of a degree. In fact, my experience has been kind of the opposite. So early on, it was scary back when I had no experience. So people back then would probably not be as interested, but I didn't feel it was any different for people who had a degree and had no experience. Tech companies at this point kind of don't really expect a degree to equal skill. It's been disproven plenty of times, and it's been proven that no degree does not equal no skills either. So just generally, everywhere I've tried to get a job or have worked, so that's in the Middle East, in Sudan, and over here in Europe, I haven't had any issues with the lack of a degree.
Sure.
There are some things like, for example, I guess it would be harder to travel for some people. Some countries require degrees for visas, I guess. And besides that, not really. As far as I can tell, after getting some experience, not having a degree has made me slightly more interesting. Like I stand out sometimes, that there's no school on my resume or something.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, one of the things I've noticed in the U.S. is it used to be that the degree was required, but over the past, I'll say 10 years for sure, probably going back 15 years, it's become more of a club card. It may open a few doors, but it doesn't stop, your advancement.
In some cases, it might make it easier to go somewhere, but it doesn't make it impossible without.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So, so I guess in your career as a developer, what kind of hurdles and challenges did you have to overcome? I mean, what are the ones that stand out in your mind as things that you really were really difficult and that you had to get around? Whether it be technical or social or whatever.
So I guess it's hard to kind of pin down one thing, one issue I ran into, but there's definitely been learning moments. For example, learning that your camp isn't necessarily right. And this applies to just kind of what your tech choices, your style, your methodologies. Don't get too entrenched. Like I see people in discussions getting quite quite, I'm not sure what the right word is, but everyone just kind of takes it personal for some reason. And the belief that what I do is right and what you do is wrong is something that I definitely had. I used to have like, I still do. I'm not gonna lie. Like I still have languages that I hate and frameworks that I like, but I understand now that the ones that I don't like, that's just a preference. And I've learned that has actually slowed me down. When I used to be just kind of dismissive of other things, that has caused me to slow down. So I have had to learn not to do that. I've learned to understand really what my skill level is and be okay with it. That's the important part. So I can remember times when I was cocky. Those were probably the worst, because those were definitely when I was not learning anything. As soon as you're cocky and you think you know what you know more, then that's actually the worst position to be in, because you're just going to stop learning. Sure. But at the same time, you shouldn't feel like you are unable to contribute, or you should just kind of listen to what people tell you and go, no, you have like your opinion, you have your ideas, you have your calculations. So it's mostly just kind of a mentality, really, building the mentality that I have now. I still am, so it's hard to pinpoint any point in time.
Yeah, as dynamic as the ecosystem is, I find it hard to believe that anything that we have today will be around in 20 years. I mean, look at jQuery. It was hot, even 5 years ago, and now everyone kind of looks down their nose at it.
That's already happening with RESTful APIs in a way,
yeah.
Which is, it's not exactly the same thing. They still have a place, but you kind of mention it now. Everyone's like, really? Not GraphQL? Why?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So knowing what you know now, would you repeat your decision to become a developer?
Yes. Probably would have dropped out earlier.
Gotcha. Okay. What do you find most satisfying about being a developer?
The freedom, for sure. I guess it's a cliche and everyone says this, but it is so true. Just freedom in a lot of ways. So freedom to build something out of pretty much nothing, like just sitting at your desk. You can build an entire business. You can build a product. You can change the world, essentially. But also just the industry itself is massive. There's a massive lack of developers. I guess it differs from from place to place, but you're free to move. Once, like the first couple of years, you're going to be hard while you're gaining experience. But after that, especially if you're a continuous learner, because then you're a hot commodity, and you're free to move around more and just interacting with people from all over the world, because this is an industry that is everywhere. And there's so many voices online. You can meet people at conferences. It's just such a dynamic and open and free kind of industry, and it's moving so fast, which I love.
Sure. Yeah, that it is. It's really hard to keep up with, which feeds that imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So besides developing, and I know you spend a lot of time in the Chingus that people, you and Vamp both do that, and Mario, that people don't see in Discord. How do you maintain your sanity? I mean, what do you do to relax and to blow off steam and to give your mind, your brain a chance to relax, so your subconscious can concentrate on.
Well, that's the thing. I've actually given up on maintaining my sanity.
Okay.
I used to be living right on the edge, and I've just kind of given in. So, yeah. No, but in truth, I still kind of do have a problem with balancing it. I still probably code way more than you should, just to stay healthy, because it's my day job, and then I work on projects. And even when I'm not working on projects, it's like, oh, that new framework that I'm never going to use, I should probably learn about it. So it has led to burnouts in the past, which was not great. So slowly I've learned to kind of take breaks. I try not to code too much on the weekends. I try to do things that will force me not to code more. So things like either I would try to get out of the city or just leave my laptop behind, kind of. I used to take it everywhere, so that was part of the problem. Some of my hobbies that help me stay away from the laptop, gaming. I play a lot of Counter-Strike, too much, maybe. Maybe that's another problem. Uh, solving one problem with another problem is a valid way to get away. I also have my cat now, distracts me quite a bit. Learning to play the piano, so slowly I'm decreasing the amount of coding I do, but I'm actually getting faster in terms of learning. So it was net positive.
Yeah, that's cool that you mentioned the piano, because there have been some studies I saw years ago that that there is a correlation between music and programming and developing. That,
interesting.
Yeah. In fact, I years ago I had worked with a gentleman that was an IBM fellow that was a jazz pianist, and a very good one. In fact, he could have, I think he could have very easily gone, made his profession music and his hobby IT versus the other way around.
That is pretty interesting. I might head in that direction myself.
There you go.
Except my skills haven't really transferred, and no one should hear me play piano. It's fun for me.
Gotcha. What I'm just curious, what kind of music do you like the best? What are you practicing or trying to learn on the piano?
The song I'm currently practicing on, because I'm still at the level where I just want to really learn one song, Muy Tranquilo by Grammatic. I guess it's got a jazzy blues vibe to it.
Sure. Why don't we move on? Let's talk about your job. I mean, tell us about your current job.
Right now, I'm working for Booking.com here in Amsterdam. I'm a full stack developer. I work in the machine learning services track, and we build tools and services that help like internal teams and data scientists and everything build machine learning models and supply them to the rest of the company. And it's sort of, I build internal websites is the easiest way to explain it.
So do you get involved in the machine learning algorithms and the
not yet. I'm hoping to. I do not have the skill set yet, but I do kind of float around when discussions are happening, and I try to keep up with what their plans are based on what my tasks are. And so it's definitely an interesting world. It's a rabbit hole that I will go down eventually, based on my interests. But I'm still mostly just web stuff.
Sure.
And there's plenty going on there.
Sure. How did you find Booking?
A friend recommended me, actually. I honestly had no idea that Booking was in Amsterdam or that it was as big as it is. But a friend of mine told me that it's a pretty good company to work at, and they've got a good tech culture, and invited me over.
Cool. Could you talk a bit about just that whole interview process from the time that you submitted an application to the time you got the job? I mean, what was that like?
It's actually kind of interesting in my case, because I was interviewing a few different places at the same time. And before even interviewing with Booking, before even starting the process, I had already received a few offers. But at the time I was living in Jordan. And for some reason, I guess it was a good call based on my experience now. But for some reason, I said, no, I want to travel. I'm more interested in changing location than just going for a good company at that time. And then I ended up coming here, and Amsterdam's awesome and Booking's awesome. So that's been a good choice. The interview process was fairly standard. It was actually pretty quick and convenient. It started off with one or two technical phone calls. Of course, there was a recruiter phone call at the beginning, which was just kind of a chill conversation, where it's just general questions, culture fit, I guess. And then some technical interviews, technical phone interviews. They're not really on the phone; they're just called that, but they're on online. Basically, questions I had to solve. I'm not sure how much. I can't really say the questions, obviously, but
Sure.
they were just basically related to the role. So I'm interviewing as a full stack developer. They were questions related to building websites and it's just testing my skills. And the interviewers did a good job of just kind of making sure I didn't get too nervous or anything. It was a calm atmosphere is what I felt like. So I didn't really have any issues at that stage. And then the final stage was a series of interviews in one day with a focus on different parts of the role. So full stack kind of encompasses a few different things. So there was a system design interview, there was a front end interview, and then there was a back end interview. If I remember that correctly, I'm not entirely sure, but it was definitely a series of interviews at the end, and eventually an offer.
Cool. Now, those interviews at the end, were those with like different groups within that team, different individuals, or was it the whole team got together to do the interview?
Well, actually, in Booking's case, the interviewers are not your team. You don't know yet at that stage what team you're going to be on. There's just other people who are, I guess, qualified to interview. So most likely full stack developers who have been at the company for a while, maybe senior people, depending on what role you're interviewing for. And in my case, it was, for the most part, senior full stack developers, I think. At least the last one was. And yeah, but I've never seen those people since. And it's quite a big company. So.
Sure. So was the first time you met your full team when your first day that you showed up on the job?
No. So the way Booking does it, which I guess is common, it might differ slightly amongst the big companies at least, is we had a training period for at least 2 months where they taught us their stack, the different tools and languages and frameworks, the way things work at Booking. So just kind of the culture itself, a lot of the soft skills that are needed at Booking, because every company has its own way of operating. Like the tech stack is probably, I would say, the easiest part to just get used to a new tech stack. It just takes time. It's if all it takes is time, that's an easy thing to do. But just kind of learning how a company operates, that's probably what is the most different. Luckily for me, the culture here at Booking fits nicely with the way I operate. And eventually, after the training period, I was assigned to the team that I am currently on, which is MLS.
That's really cool that they put that amount of time, that amount of investment into making sure you were acclimated and you had the information you need to do the job, as opposed to just throwing you in and saying, go do this.
Yeah, well, they take it very seriously to make sure that you fit in, not just because they already know you're a good engineer. You made it through the interview process. They already know you have the skills to do your job. So it's more important at that stage to kind of make sure you're able to work together effectively, to work with other teams, work with other stakeholders. Basically, you need to understand how things, how people kind of operate, how people share information, how to teach other people things, how to find a mentor. All that kind of stuff is far more important, in my opinion.
Sure. What was the hardest part for you about that interview process, and what did you learn from it? What was your takeaway?
For me, I guess it probably would have been the system design interview, and my takeaway was I should study more system design.
Okay.
Put it simply.
So system design in terms of architecture?
Yeah, so I don't remember the specifics of the problem, but it would go along the lines of It would be a kind of vague problem. So those are usually the kind of problems where you should, as the person taking the interview, you should kind of ask as many questions as you can. So it would be vague, like, oh, I need a system that can do X. Like, these are the requirements for your system. And then you need to ask as many clarifying questions as you can, because they would intentionally hide some details just to make sure that you're able to kind of communicate back and forth, and also admit when you don't know something. And talk out loud is pretty important when designing, especially because it's not so much there's a one right answer. That's the thing with system design interviews. There is no one right answer usually. And so you kind of have to kind of go back and forth with your interviewer and discuss what you're working on, because they will kind of poke at it essentially, and start to kind of drop hints as to what like where your design might fail in meeting the requirements. I didn't really so much have issues with communicating with the interviewer as much as I did with the problem itself, but I don't really remember what it was. I just remember it wasn't a fun interview.
Sure. You probably blocked it off now.
Yeah. Yeah. My brain did me a favor there.
What's the most satisfying part of your job? I mean, what keeps you returning to booking day in and day out?
Honestly, it's the colleagues, the people that are around me, and just in the company in general. It's really fun that I could easily, I'm interested in a certain topic that I'm working on, and I don't want to just kind of finish a task and move on. I want to dig deeper. Most of the time, I guess in my case, in my experience, all of the time, people are okay with grabbing a coffee to sit and discuss something, like, and just nerd out about a solution. Which is pretty cool, because I kind of like to learn new things.
Nice. So let's take the other side of that. What's the most frustrating part about the job?
In my case, probably whenever I have to deal with legacy systems. But I guess that's kind of a common trope. Nobody likes to deal with legacy systems, regardless of how, when, or with what they were built. Legacy is legacy. It's not fun trying to sort of analyze what this is supposed to be doing. Usually documentation is scarce. Yeah, it's not fun. I don't have to do that often, which is great, but yeah.
Gotcha. You'll leave that frustration for someone looking at your code.
Exactly. I leave no documentation. Just always talking.
What skills do you think are the most helpful in your role? And what would you advise, other devs that are preparing to find a job to learn more about?
I would say probably curiosity, especially as a web developer, because the landscape changes quite often. So you've got to at least be willing to look at something new, not necessarily pick it up. I'm not suggesting jump on whatever is currently the most hyped thing. That is actually very bad if you do that. Usually it does not end up well, and you end up changing context so much you don't really move forward. But just stay curious. Like, don't get fixated in however you do things now. That would probably be my advice.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I've picked on the old-time mainframe programmers, quite a bit in the past few weeks. But there are a lot of those folks that they work themselves out of a job because they never picked up anything new.
Yeah, that's actually, in my opinion, it might even help with imposter syndrome a little bit, because if you're picking up a new technology, then everyone else is new to it. So it helps in some way. That's
a really good point. That's true. So, do you have any other advice for folks that are preparing to enter the job market, preparing for interviews, for example, and anything you've found along the way that you think folks should concentrate on?
Asking questions, I guess, is really important. When you're on the job, ask your colleagues about why they did something a certain way or what they think of your work. Of course, just feedback in general is great. You'll learn a lot of things, and try to grab coffees with people as well to learn about what they do. But also during the interview process, if you felt it went well, ask about that. Ask what the interviewer thought. Well, maybe not directly like that, but I guess you can also ask at the end of the interview process, even if it was not, it didn't go well. If you have the chance, ask what they were looking for, what you were missing. Some interviewers or companies are willing to share that information. It could be incredibly valuable. So just ask around.
Sure. Yeah, that's good advice. Okay, for everyone that's viewing, if you have questions, go ahead and post them in the chat, and we're going to move on. And could you tell us about what you're working on now, more from a technical aspect, and why it's exciting to you? What are you doing that's interesting?
Chingu. Chingu, I guess, is my main project besides work. And it's extremely interesting because the community is so dynamic. It's such a interesting thing to try and build. Really, it's there's a lot of unknowns, of course, but there's a lot of energy in this community, and so it's interesting to try and build the tools for it. And it's been fun. It's mostly been Red Bull field sessions with me and Vab and Mario and Francesca, you and Chance, where we just kind of discuss things, discuss where we want to, like how we want to approach solutions to problems that we have in the community. And then me and Vamp will go off into our own corner and spend an hour over engineering, and then 3 hours bringing it back down to a realistic solution. And then the coding is actually probably the least amount, like the least thing we spend time on. I think I personally enjoy the design process most. Designing a new system, designing a framework, designing like a database, just design something. I got my whiteboard right there. Gotcha. That's the most fun.
That's the cleanest I've seen that whiteboard in months.
Oh yeah, I refreshed it. Got new markers too.
All right. Yeah, for those
spring is here.
Normally it's the last iteration I saw was just full of database diagrams. There were probably, I'm guessing, 15 or 20 different tables, in the database diagram, and all the relationships.
Yeah, I gotta have it. Paper is wasteful, So.
So let's go back to booking. How many different projects have you worked on there? And of those, if you're allowed to talk about it, and of those, what was the most fun?
So I've only been here about a year. So I've been in the same team the whole time, but I've worked on a couple of different projects. Some of them were simple websites. Others were sort of back-end services. I guess the most interesting is whenever you're doing something, it's not so much technically interesting, but it might be just the collaborative part of it. Whenever I'm working on something that involves dealing with multiple other teams that might be in completely different parts of the company, they might have different tech stacks, they might operate differently. It's very interesting to kind of see that dynamic and how putting a bunch of smart people together comes up with something awesome. And I'm just kind of like sitting there and learning from everyone. That for me is the most fun, even if the project itself might not be technically, might not require I'm not like, hammering out crazy algorithms all the time or anything like that. But it just how all the things fit together. That's fun.
Gotcha. I'm curious. Does booking? Are they an agile organization, or what do they do to manage the projects to make sure they get completed on time and on budget, and all of those boring things?
Where I work, so it differs from area to area as far as I can tell. But where I work, the part of the company that I work in, deadlines are not sort of hard. It's more so, and some teams operate using agile methodologies, some don't. It's also basically, it depends on the team. So sure. Each things in booking are bottom up. So like leadership decisions come from the top, but generally speaking, how to get a product done, should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? Should we use agile to manage ourselves? That's a decision that's made by the team together. So the way my team operates is it's not really agile. We do like retrospectives, we do planning meetings and everything, but we're not really following a specific framework. We just kind of organically found something that works for us, and that's how we choose to operate.
Success is the best path to follow in a lot of cases. I've never seen. I've been doing Scrum for 5 years or so, and I've yet to see a company that does 100% pure Scrum. So,
yeah.
So what's the most frustrating project you've worked on?
Most frustrating.
And why?
This was before booking. So this was actually early days of me developing and actually getting paid for it. So this was probably my first year as a professional. I worked on a social network. Not sure what the name was, honestly, because it never launched. And it was a flawed idea to begin with, but at the time I was just looking for technical experience. So I wasn't really concerned with the product. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna, enjoy the technical challenges and let them figure out that this is a dead end business. But that one was frustrating because they kept changing requirements so much. Like at one point it was a media platform, and then suddenly it's Twitter, and I don't know. It was frustrating just because the direction changed so much. And as someone who likes to plan and design things, that's not fun.
Sure. Well, those are typically, I mean, tell me in this situation, did you have to throw away a lot of code?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
Yeah.
For me at the time, it wasn't so bad because I was coding all day, every day anyway. So whether the code got thrown away or not didn't really matter to me at the time. I was like, can I write more code? Yes. Okay, I'm good.
Gotcha. Yeah, that would be frustrating. So a question that came up in the chat was, after school, graduates go straight to job hunting. What should self-taught students do after studying for a while? In other words, when you get out of university or any kind of training, do you have any advice for how to prepare for the job market?
Build projects. I mean, I know everyone's heard that a lot, especially in this community, but building projects is definitely what got me my first job, and it's what has continued to get me jobs since, because I don't have anything else to base my experience on. But building projects, and I'm not necessarily talking about the throwaway projects, the experiments, do those too. Those sharpen your skills, but also find something that you kind of think you could probably pull off. I could do this. It could be something local, something for your neighborhood, something for your city. But just kind of a cool idea if you have any, or something you want to see, or something you want to clone. You think you might be able to add features to something you use. Just build as much as you can. Build as many things. Well, no, that's probably not the right thing. But build as much as you can for sure. Sharpen your skills, and that is probably what will help you get a job.
Gotcha. How much did Booking or any of your other employers jobs you've had, how much weight do you think they put into your GitHub, your repos, and looking at that as essentially your portfolio, or did you have some other type of portfolio you presented?
I'm not entirely clear on how much weight they put on that, but it probably wasn't too much, because I remember at the time my GitHub profile was pretty bare. At the very least, most things were private, so they had no way of seeing it. It was mostly work I did for other companies that were like in private repositories, private orgs and stuff. So I don't think, like, they probably looked at it, and some of the projects that were mentioned on my resume are on my GitHub, but I don't think it was too big of a deal. They just looked at the points that I listed on my resume, technologies that I said I've worked with, stacks, like solutions that I've come up with in the past, problems that I've had to overcome. So if you kind of add those kind of things into your resume as well, not just list a bunch of languages and frameworks, add stuff like, I increased performance of X by doing Y. That is, I think, much more interesting for a scouting person. I forgot the name.
Like a recruiter or a...
That's the one. Yeah, for a recruiter, they'd probably be looking for stuff like that as well. The languages and frameworks are, of course, important, but vary it. Gotcha.
Why don't we, I guess just a reminder, everyone, post any questions you have in the chat. We've got about 20 more minutes. Let's move on and kind of talk about the future. What do you see, or where do you see the JavaScript ecosystem heading? Call it in a time frame of like the next 5 years. What do you think are going to be the next big things
for the JavaScript ecosystem?
Yeah. So that includes frameworks, packages, the language itself, obviously.
I think we're already at a point in the JavaScript ecosystem where some questions are being raised as to what JavaScript is, because it's everywhere. It runs in the browser, it runs on servers, you can run it on IoT devices, you can do everything with JavaScript essentially. And what has started to kind of happen because of that is you would see things built for JavaScript that have nothing to do with each other. So some things would be low-level libraries that are meant to compile to something that'll run on an IoT device, and others are meant for web servers. And what I think will then happen, and I guess it already kind of has, and there's some discussions on Twitter about this, but what will happen is that the language itself will either evolve to be good at solving all of those things, or it will eventually split up. And maybe other flavors of JavaScript will emerge from the core JavaScript, or some of those use cases will just die out and people will move to other languages, but that's unlikely. So the language itself obviously continues to evolve. Those features that get added to the language are added based on what the use cases of the language are, and so that's becoming a lot more general.
I was going to ask you, when you look at like TC39, do you get a feeling or a worry that the language is becoming a little fragmented? Like there are different things going in, as you said, that have no relationship to one another.
I mean, I'm a little worried. Anything getting fragmented is usually not a good thing. But at the same time, I don't think we're at the point where it's an issue. It isn't yet. I don't think the things that have been added yet have just ruined the language or anything like that. And I don't think there will ever be a point where adding something ruins the language, but it will make the community less cohesive. I think that's probably what people are most worried about, is that right now you can go to anywhere where people are talking about JavaScript and the best practices will generally be the same. But once the language includes a lot of different things and is used in a lot of different ways, then the best practices will not be the same everywhere. They aren't right now, but they're similar enough. So that will make it harder for people learning. It'll make it seem like there's a lot more to learn before you know JavaScript. So that's a worry, but
sure.
I think it's a ways off.
It's kind of a dual-edged sword, because if you don't have that dynamic, that dynamism, then the language becomes stagnant. But if you have it, then you have some of these other worries. So it all fits in together.
Yeah.
And Paul just called me out on my mainframe comment and said that some mainframers are trying to learn new things. That's good. Keep it up.
Yes, we're not all like that.
We need more of you. Yeah. So, what skills do you think that developers need to start learning now, or to concentrate on now, to be prepared for, the next 5 years?
probably the things that come to mind have been around for a bit, but I think they're still going to remain important in the next couple of years. Component design, that is on the front end. So kind of learn concepts and best practices surrounding that. It doesn't have to be specifically React or Vue or whatever. A lot of these concepts carry over between these frameworks, and these frameworks follow each other in ways. So just learning how to break up bigger problems on the front end into smaller components, learning how to organize your code and everything around that. On the back end of things, I'm worried that it might be a trend, but it doesn't seem that way. So learning Kubernetes probably would be a safe bet. Containerization in general is definitely a safe bet. If you're on the back end side of things, learn how to isolate components, learn some of the concepts around microservices, service-oriented architecture in general. What you're going to find, so just like fair warning going into any of these topics, is that there is no agreement on what's right. There is like camps is what you're going to find.
Sure.
I would say the thing I do, at least, and I recommend it, is do not fall into any of the camps. Just maybe you have some camps you agree with more often than others, but just don't fall into any of the camps. It's you learn more that way.
Sure. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah. A question just popped up about how important do you think DevOps or SRE is in the developer world? And I'm going to assume specifically to people that are in the JavaScript ecosystem and are looking for those positions or opportunities.
Extremely important.
Yeah.
DevOps is like SREs are like, it's probably more specific, I guess, but DevOps is something that everyone should be involved in. The developers, the SREs, the I guess management, even, like everyone should kind of know what the flow should be for things to work and for things to operate, and it should be automated. It should be monitored. It should be transparent. DevOps will save you a lot of hurt, and it'll save you a lot of time in terms of debugging problems, in terms of limiting damage, in terms of freeing up time just in general. So I think it's very important, definitely in the developer world. SREs specifically are extremely important as well for larger systems. So this could be large companies, but also smaller companies and medium-sized companies that have large or complex systems. You will probably need someone there just to make the system work and run and be reliable. It's in the name, site reliability engineering. It's definitely important. From what I can tell, SREs are scarce. So if that's something you're thinking of getting into, good luck.
Yeah, I'll post the link in the show notes. The book is probably 4 or 5 years old now, but a group of Google SREs
they update it every year.
They do? Okay. Yeah, it's titled, it's from O'Reilly, and it's System Reliability Engineering. It's a really good book.
Yeah.
And it's good if you're interested in DevOps in general, I think. So, is there anything, we talked about what you think developers should start learning now to be prepared. Is there anything that you think they should stop doing right now?
Probably stop coding. It's the weekend. Just go have fun or just relax outside, watch Futurama. I don't know. That's the advice I'd give myself. Because I'm probably going to code right after this. The whiteboard's empty. I've got to do something.
Oh, you and me both.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, is there any habits or anything you see in developers that you think that it would be important for them to, if not stop, to question?
I would say question the wars that are going on in different parts of, like in different developer communities. So don't participate too much in these framework wars, for example, in language wars. There's nothing to gain. The other camp is just as entrenched as yours. You're not going to convince anyone. Even if you do, you gain nothing. There's not much to learn from those kind of messy fights. There are definitely some constructive discussions that do happen around why I think my thing is better than your thing. And then you can learn from that if the conversation stays civil and stays on point and actual pieces of the frameworks are discussed and not just opinionated subjective things, which rarely happens. So that's why I would say just avoid that entirely.
Sure. Yeah, I actually think like the Angular, the Vue, and the React team set a good example there, because those teams, there are individuals on those teams that talk pretty closely with one another. That's one reason when you see a feature come out in one, it comes out in the others.
That's good advice. Probably follow those people on Twitter.
Yeah, yeah, I know Evan Yu and Dan Abramov in particular
and
have a lot of chatter. Yeah, and Sophie. Yeah.
Those people are active on Twitter as well, so it's good.
True. What's the best advice you received when you were starting your career as a dev?
Best advice I received: keep learning. That was very early on. That was, I think, my first semester in university. I wasn't even working professionally or anything yet, and I had barely gotten to grips with JavaScript at that point. But it was basically just kind of never be satisfied. It's never over. This was from a friend of mine who now works at Google, actually an SRE there. And he just kind of encouraged me to don't just, the context was more about university then, but it's just like, don't just take this book that someone gave you and told you learn this thing. Explore, find out what else there is. You try to reflect, see where you're lacking, try to improve those things. So just keep learning, and I've taken that to heart.
Cool. No, that's good advice. So another question came up. How can one get a remote job without a hassle as a self-taught developer? That's a big question.
Without a hassle as a self-taught developer, you're going to need to prove yourself. That's the thing about self-taught or dropping out in general, I guess, as well. There's trade-offs. You're like, the point of a degree or certificate is, hey, I am vouching for this person that they know X or they know Y. So if you don't have that, then you're going to need to prove yourself. And we come back to the point of projects. That's the best way. There are other ways, but that is probably the best way. And if you can prove yourself with projects and getting your name out there, that's very important as well. So if you can, just try to blog about everything you do. And people are usually afraid of doing this. I am guilty, but people are afraid of doing this because like somebody's already blogged about this. Somebody can explain it better. Why should I? Well, one, you don't know that for a fact. If it took you a while to figure out a problem and you didn't find solutions online, maybe you should write it. And what this does is then increase, like, you have a brand essentially. If you're trying to prove yourself without a degree or without any sort of accreditation, basically you need to have a brand. Gotcha. That'll probably help with the remote job.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's a good point also that even if it's something that's been hashed a lot of different ways, sometimes a different viewpoint is good.
Yeah.
And if you've had that question, even if there's 10,000 articles on that subject, like promises is one that almost seems like it's been overwritten about.
Yeah.
But if you've got a question, someone else does as well.
That's true.
So, all right, we're coming up on the end of our time, so I want to make sure that if there's any more questions, you get them posted in the chat. So tell us about Zelda.
Zelda's awesome, but she's messy. She likes to run in the mud outside, which is not great, and I did not expect that of a cat. But yeah, I've given up on cleaning, so it's good that you can just see my face right now.
Yeah, we don't let ours out, but your cat, I'll try to find a picture as well, but She looks like a Maine Coon cat, which is a great breed. And,
Yeah. I had to let her out. Otherwise, I would have just suffered in many losses in terms of furniture inside. So let her outside, let her climb trees or whatever she likes to do, and she'll be back eventually.
Gotcha. Well, that's all the questions I have. And I don't see any posted in the chat. So we are almost to our time. Before we started, Sabby was worried that we wouldn't go the full time, but we managed to fill it up. And,
I did not know I had material. Cool.
yeah. Oh, so here's one more. How can one become a web developer without getting confused? Another big question.
As someone who's been a web developer for 4 years, being confused is part of it. That's like a fact of being a web developer. You just kind of have to get used to the confusion. You're never gonna, something I used to do early on, which was bad. I used to always try to feel like if I don't understand a part of something, I'm not good at it, which is a flawed theory, because everything that we're working with today, all of these languages and frameworks have been built upon years and years of other things being built before them. And so there's no way you're going to understand everything ever. Even if you do, the next thing's right around the corner, and you're probably not going to understand that right out the gate. So just kind of be okay with having gaps. That's fine. You always have time to go back and work on them.
You know, I tell me how you react to this, but I've kind of been developing this feeling over the past couple of years that, you know, the value of a web developer isn't necessarily the technology. While that is a huge part of it, you know, if you're a React developer, you need to know React, but a lot of your value is how quickly you learn, and that what we're learning from this rapidly changing ecosystem is how to learn faster and better.
Oh, so, yeah, and companies definitely think the same. Like the companies I've worked at least, and the ones that I've gotten close to, all think the same. They prefer people who are adaptable. You may be working with one stack for years, but you don't know that for sure. You don't know what's coming up. You don't know if that same company is going to be around, or if you're going to have to move. Just be adaptable. And it helps you mentally as well, because it definitely helps with imposter syndrome if you start to be okay with not knowing things. And it helps you move faster, because part of me trying to make sure I knew everything was me wasting time. I'd be trying to learn, let's say I'm trying to learn how to work with Kubernetes, and then I figure out, oh, but I have no idea how the networking in Kubernetes works. If I go down that rabbit hole, sure, I'll come out with a more in-depth understanding of this thing that I'm using. But if I had just learned how to get something deployed using Kubernetes, I am on my way to build what I wanted to build.
Sure. We have time for one more question. I think we've covered the one that was posted around what's the best way to learn development, and you know, practicing and building projects is a huge part of that. The other one, you have any more advice about the imposter syndrome, and you know how you got around it?
So one, I would say don't assume it's something. Imposter syndrome itself is not related to you being new or you being an amateur. I was actually coincidentally talking to Jim about this not too long ago, that I felt it very recently, and I've been doing this for years, and I'm working at a big company and everything. Imposter syndrome comes and goes for everyone. So you having it is not part of you being new or you being an amateur. It's just a feeling that you have at this point in time. So my advice is just keep that in mind. So do not associate, like, I still feel this way means I'm still a noob. It has nothing to do with it. Just keep that in mind.
Gotcha. Good advice. So we are at the end of our time. So I think we're ready to wrap it up. I want to thank you, Sab, for giving us your time today. It's been a great conversation. You've had a lot of information that I know that Chingus will be able to use. Yeah, it's been great conversation. And so with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll post this on YouTube, so it's available for replay. And with that, I'll say good afternoon to everyone, good evening, good morning, whatever it is in your time zone. And we'll let you have the rest of your evening back, Sab.
All right. Goodbye.
Hey, thanks again. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.